The first principle: restore the natural order. We will revive the old ways, reinstating natural law as the highest law, recognizing concepts of marriage, gender, race, and the environment in the ancient sense. This is the organizing principle of all things. The modern world is unnatural, and it must be destroyed by fire. We must re-establish harmony with the environment, realigning our values so that we realize that the preservation of the natural world is more important than the blind pursuit of profit. We must return to the ideals of our ancestors, re-implementing the concepts of hierarchy and excellence as opposed to equality, virtue as opposed to wealth, aristocracy as opposed to democracy, tradition as opposed to progress, the spirit as opposed to secularism and materialism. The second principle: defend the West. We will fight to preserve our proud heritage and educate our children in European high culture, recognizing as total enemies all who undermine the Imperium. The creation and preservation of high art is essential to the safeguarding of our civilization itself. The music of Wagner and Beethoven, Mussorgsky and Stravinsky, Verdi and Vivaldi must be taught to our children and performed in our cities. The art of Da Vinci and Botticelli, Caravaggio and Riefenstahl, Rubens and Dali must be preserved, revered, and exhibited. The writing of Dante and Homer, of Lovecraft and Shakespeare, of Tolkien and Goethe must be learnt and promoted. Complementary to the creation and preservation of the beautiful is the utter annihilation of the ugly, the hideous, the deformed. All so-called modern art, all pornography and perverted trash, the sick products of degenerate minds, must be purged, devoured by flame. We cannot tolerate the display of this filth of subhumans any more than we would chimpanzees throwing feces at our houses. This imperative demands that we educate our children and preserve our societies, protecting them from corruption from within and invasion from without. The West, its culture and civilization, must be defended with supreme violence in these dark times. The third principle: end white genocide. We will halt the flood of immigrants, cease all so-called diversity programs, and terminate the trend of whites becoming unwelcome minorities in their own countries. Our forefathers explored outer space after our ancestors had conquered the world. We, in contrast, lament over transsexuals in our bathrooms and drag queens reading to our children, bickering on the internet about who is whiter than whom, while being ethnically cleansed in our own homelands instead of taking up arms. Where our ancestors were masters of the universe, we struggle for mastery over our own lives, let alone the well-being of our families. In post-Charlottesville America, self-respecting whites are demonized in the same manner as witches in 17th century Salem or devil worshippers in medieval Europe. We have been driven underground, the threat of ostracism and violent reprisal ever present should we dare to raise a voice of protest against the subjugation of our people or our replacement by third world immigrants. The suicidal policies of immigration, multiculturalism, and the ethnic cleansing of European Americans must be terminated and reversed. The fourth principle: make Americans great again. We will raise up the poor and working class by eschewing obsolete notions of capitalism and socialism, returning to a holistic nationalism. Nationalism, when properly oriented, does not promote one pet economist or another, but rather focuses on what is best for the nation, which is to say, the people of whom the nation is made. It is not our aim to defend either laissez-faire capitalism or National Socialism. Our aim is to defend to the hilt the American citizen and his family. The present system is not just unsustainable, it is criminal. Many in the richest country in the world suffer poverty unimaginable by their fellow Americans in a neighborhood 2 miles away. Christian missionaries travel the world, to South America, to Africa, to Asia, to give food and clothing and shelter to the world's poor, and yet they are blind to the suffering just down the street from their wealthy churches. Usury, the corruption of our legislatures by special interests, the usurpation of our monetary system by a private central bank, the importation of cheap labor from the Third World, all these must come to an end, so that the American citizen may be strengthened. Then we can discuss competing economic theories. The fifth principle, better dead than red. We will crush the communist mob, curing the Marxist plague by physically removing the politicians, media executives, and professors instrumental in the epidemic. We who lived in the Cold War tend to understand communism in the Soviet sense. This is, however, only one manifestation of the plague. We know now its many faces: cultural Marxism, feminism, Hollywood, the mass media, the educational institutions, the Antifa. Communism is the enemy of all humankind. It is anti-human, reducing the human experience to economic terms and denying biological reality. It is anti-white, whether it rears its head in Europe or North America, as it seeks the destruction of our entire race. It is anti-nature, promoting as it does the overthrow of the strong by the weak, as well as the implementation of the artificial hoax of equality. It seeks the subversion of all tradition and custom, of Western civilization, and of the natural order itself. Communism in all forms must be exterminated from the face of the earth. The sixth principle, stop the machines. We will bring Silicon Valley to heel, implement farming and environmental initiatives to benefit the public welfare, and pursue policies that place humanity over technology. The first and foremost offender to the inalienable right of free speech is not the federal government, but private companies in Silicon Valley. It was not the State Department, but rather Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube that censored our speech and banned us from the public forum. It was not the Department of Justice, but PayPal, Stripe, and Patreon that disrupted our ability to fundraise. More importantly, these things are but the predictable effects of the industrial technological system, which has become a cancer upon humanity and all the earth. Our obsession with and utter dependence upon technology has not only made us weak, it has made us something less than human. We must return to the values and practices that make us strong. We must be not insects, but men.
Now is the only thing that's real.
The seventh principle, dismantle the deep state. We will root out the corruption of the federal government, dissolving unnecessary bureaucratic institutions and trying traitors for treason. The subversion of our country was not mere accident. Many of the evils that have befallen our once great country stem from the underground network of unaccountable bureaucratic organizations. The involvement of intelligence departments with mass media in Silicon Valley, the reliance of the Justice Department on communist propaganda outfits like the SPLC and ProPublica, and the notorious corruption of all levels of government by the Israel lobby, the pharmaceutical industry, and others demonstrate the truth of this for all to see. Neither is the present subversion of our movement attributable to any mistake. Domestic counterintelligence operatives and foreign agents alike have a vested interest in halting our political activity. Through slander, disinformation, and the promotion of infighting, they seek to disrupt any and all nationalist threats to their globalist agenda. They must be held accountable. The eighth principle, eat the bankers. We will end the Federal Reserve and the power of the international banking cartels, prohibiting usury and ensuring that monetary policy is determined by the public interest. There exists no greater threat to this country than that of international finance. Its greed causes the wars of mankind. Its debts strangle nations. Whereas the colonists of old understood it to be their rightful burden to administer government to those they conquered, the international financiers bear no responsibility whatsoever. They rape where they steal. They murder where they pillage. The yoke of international finance touches not a country without crippling it. If there is but one enemy upon which all Americans can agree, it is the bankers. With their riches, they buy our media and our politicians, and they spin the news and the laws against their host nations. Their usury rusts the chisel, it rusts the craft and the craftsman, it gnaws the thread and the loom. They are parasites latched onto the skin of America, feeding on the lifeblood of our people. They must be liquidated. The ninth principle: conquer. We will wage war only in America's interests, never the interests of Israel, international finance, or the corrupt international order. This ninth and final principle is reclamation of the Aryan spirit of conquest and the eternal burden of our people to bring order to the world. This principle brings everything full circle, for it is through conquest that we will restore the natural order. These, then, are the principles upon which we found our political action. If you agree with these principles, we ask you to work with us. If you disagree with these principles, we wish you peace, so long as you do not oppose us. If you act against us in the implementation of these principles, you mark yourself our enemy. This is more than an election. This is a war. Act accordingly.